Ever met someone who just rubbed you the wrong way? That coworker whose arrogance makes your skin crawl? That friend who's always playing the victim? That family member whose criticism feels utterly suffocating? Today we're exploring one of psychology's most provocative truths, that we inevitably become what we hate about ourselves. This isn't mystical nonsense. It's a psychological pattern observed by therapists, researchers, and wisdom traditions across cultures. Understanding this mechanism could be your key to greater self-awareness, better relationships, and profound personal freedom. Stick around as we dive deep into the psychology of your shadow self, why your judgments of others often reveal hidden aspects of yourself, and most importantly, how to break this cycle. You'll understand why we become what we hate. We need to introduce you to a concept from the renowned psychologist Carl Jung, what he called the shadow self. In simple terms, your shadow contains all the parts of yourself that you've been conditioned to reject, suppress, or deny. Think about your childhood. When you expressed anger, maybe you were told nice children don't get angry. When you cried, perhaps you heard, stop being so sensitive. When you wanted something for yourself, you might have been called selfish. Slowly, you learn to hide these unacceptable parts to maintain love and acceptance. But here's the crucial psychological insight. What we suppress doesn't disappear. It goes underground, operating from the shadows where we have less conscious control over it. Research in psychology confirms that suppressed emotions and traits don't vanish. They often manifest in unexpected ways, sometimes even intensifying over time. This explains why that colleague who prides themselves on being so logical suddenly has explosive emotional outbursts over minor frustrations. Or why the person who values independence above all else finds themselves in clingy, dependent relationships. They're shadow manifestations. Studies show that when we treat ourselves with kindness rather than harsh judgment during difficult times, we experience most of the benefits of high self-esteem without the downsides like narcissism or constant social comparison. But our culture often teaches us the opposite, to be hard on ourselves, to reject our imperfections. Chapter 2: The Mechanism, How Projection Works. So how exactly does this transformation happen? How do we go from hating a trait in ourselves to seeing it everywhere, and eventually embodying it? The psychological mechanism is called projection. We see manipulation everywhere around us. Instead of admitting our own laziness, we become obsessed with how lazy everyone else is. The problem is what we resist persists, and what we project, we eventually attract or become. There are 3 key reasons this happens. First, by focusing exclusively on others' flaws, we blind ourselves to our own development areas. That person who's constantly criticizing others' incompetence, they're likely missing crucial opportunities to address their own skill gaps. Second, the mental energy we spend fighting something in others actually strengthens those neural pathways, making us more likely to default to those same behaviors under stress. And third, research reveals something fascinating about hate itself. Studies published in journals like the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that collective hate directed toward groups, can actually provide people with a sense of purpose and determination. This explains why hate can be so seductive and difficult to release. It makes people feel significant, like they're part of something larger. This creates a vicious cycle. We feel threatened by a trait in ourselves, we project it onto others, we become obsessed with fighting it in them, the trait gains psychological energy, we eventually manifest it ourselves. Table: The Psychology of Projection. Chapter 3: The Consequences When the Shadow Takes Over. So what does this look like in real life? Let me give you some examples. Remember how much you hated your parents' controlling behavior. Now your partner tells you you're controlling. That teacher whose criticism crushed you? Now your employees say your feedback feels devastatingly harsh. The friend who was always the victim? Now you notice yourself constantly explaining why everything that goes wrong isn't your fault. The psychological costs are very real. Research shows that self-hatred and excessive self-criticism are strongly linked to anxiety, depression, and even suicidal ideation. When we're at war with parts of ourselves, we're literally at war with ourselves. This internal conflict often leads to self-sabotage, those mysterious patterns where we undermine our own success and happiness. Studies identify common self-sabotaging behaviors including procrastination, perfectionism, relationship sabotage, and harsh self-criticism. These aren't random behaviors, they're often the shadow acting out. Perhaps most painfully, our shadow material creates relationship patterns where we constantly attract the very things we say we want to avoid. The person who fears being controlled dates controlling partners. The person who hates criticism ends up with critical friends. This isn't coincidence, it's psychological magnetism. The terrifying truth is that without awareness and integration, we don't just become what we hate, we become less flexible, less whole, and less authentic versions of ourselves, constantly fighting battles against external enemies that are actually internal ones. Chapter 4, The Way Out, Integrating Your Shadow. So, how do we break this cycle? How do we reclaim these disowned parts and prevent ourselves from becoming what we hate? Here's a practical framework. Step 1. Identify your triggers. Start paying close attention to what triggers you and others. That intense emotional reaction you feel when someone displays a particular trait. Keep a trigger journal for 1 week. Note down every time you have a strong negative reaction to someone. Look for patterns. Step 2. Investigate with curiosity, not judgment. When you identify a trigger, ask yourself with genuine curiosity, where does this exist in me? Not in the exact same form necessarily, but in some form. If you hate someone's need for attention, where might you seek validation? Step 3. Practice radical self-compassion. This is where the research gets exciting. Studies show that self-compassion, treating yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a friend, is associated with greater emotional resilience, happiness, and personal initiative to make changes. As psychologist Mark Leary explains, self-compassion isn't about self-evaluation or making excuses. It's about how you treat yourself when you encounter difficulties or notice your flaws. There's nothing wrong with negative self-evaluations as long as they're accurate. You can acknowledge, I messed that up without the additional narrative, and therefore I'm a failure who will never succeed at anything. Sustainable personal change doesn't begin with shame and self-hatred. It begins with self-acceptance. If you change something you hate about yourself, that self-hatred will simply find another target. The qualities we can't stand in others are often the exact qualities we can't stand in ourselves. Until next time, I challenge you to be a little more curious about your judgments, a little more compassionate with your flaws, and a little more courageous in embracing all of who you are.